Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad, and I'm so happy that you joined me for another episode of the podcast. And if you have not already done so, I encourage you to subscribe, become a subscriber to the podcast, and every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified on the podcast app that you use to stream great podcasts. And I'm very happy to be with you again. I'm so grateful to the listeners, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to bear witness, to be of service, to be a sister, to be someone that is actively involved in addressing the needs and the many, many needs that we have in our community. And I'm grateful to those who I get to work with in partnership in addressing the issues and concerns that we find in our community. And I think that there's nothing more important than trying to identify solutions and implementing them. Not just talk, not just identifying the problems and spewing rhetoric, but actually being part of the change and being a catalyst for change. And it's my hope that Nora Speaks podcast is that. It's a catalyst for change. It's an information source, and it's a resource, because I want it to be all that and more for the listeners of the Nora Speaks podcast. And this episode, I'm talking about mental wellness in our community, mental health. And I was recently afforded a great opportunity to speak on a panel with several other individuals who contributed to a really great conversation. And there's just so much that can be said. But of course, for the sake of time, you can't say everything. And you need to, it's good to give an audience bite-sized pieces that they can put in their pocket and walk away with, because, you know, if you if you overload someone or kind of fire hose them with information, you give them so much, even though what you may be sharing might be valuable. If you give them too much, it could be hard to for the audience, that is, to pull from it later. So it's always great to give information in nuggets and bits. And so I just wanted to expand on some things in this episode. And I hope that what I share here will be instrumental and valuable for the listeners. And in general, you know, mental health or mental wellness, it's degraded by the modern culture that we have. I mean, one would ask, what contributes to mental health challenges? And it's nice that we have taken this turn in which we are being concerned and talking about mental health openly. We know in our community, in the Black community, it's something that there's still a good deal of shame. There's still a good deal of embarrassment. And we're making strides to help our people understand and help our community understand that mental health is as important as your physical health, as if it's cardiac health, if it's your renal, kidney health, right? Digestive health and our mental health. And so as we embark on this conversation, I think we have to really identify what's happening and what's around us that is eroding the mental health, that is degrading the mental health in our community. And, you know, I say I find it somewhat challenging in these discussions because the conversation isn't always directed towards that which does degrade our mental health. We could talk about going to therapy. We could talk about psychotropic medications. We could talk about meditation, yoga, and all of those things that contribute to wellness. But I think it's also useful to identify those things that contribute to the challenges that we face. And, in our modern America, in our modern world, we have to recognize that there are foods, right, that can definitely impede our mental health. Not having a nutritious diet, not having access to good and wholesome foods. I mean, in certain environments, the most accessible foods are the foods that have the least nutritional value. And so if a family, if parents are really thinking about feeding their children, that densely nutritious food might not be so readily available, and without having to take public transportation a good distance, that really does present a hardship for parents. So sometimes we resort to what's quick and what's convenient and what's close. And if we're getting those fats, those highly fatty foods, those highly salty foods, those sugary foods, and we're feeding that to ourselves and to our children, then that can contribute to mental health issues and behavioral challenges. Our children often, go to schools and educators may not be familiar with the behavior and the activity of our children. And so they sometimes too quickly want to call in the child study team and not say, well, let's look at this child and let's identify where we can support the parents in having positive behavior change in a natural and holistic way. And sometimes that can be with foods, and that can definitely be with sleep. Getting proper rest for a child, getting adequate nutrition for a child, making sure the child is drinking enough water, getting enough physical activity. If a child is not getting a lot of physical activity because the video game, the Xbox or the PlayStation is babysitting them, that energy is still there. It's just not being utilized. And so when it's time to sit down in the classroom and the child may not have a video game controller to manipulate, the lesson in front of them may be a little boring or not as attractive to the child when the child is full of energy. And so sometimes that energy is expressed in the classroom if we're not helping our child express energy in any other way. So we have to think about our foods and the way our foods are stripped of nutrients. And I think about certain foods that are fortified. Right? Some foods we get, like milk, for example, is fortified with vitamin D. We need vitamin D. One natural way to get it is from the sun. But not having vitamin D can certainly lead to a depressed countenance, but these are things that we might not be aware of. We know that our air and our water is polluted and with an unknown number of toxins. Our media, the media that we are consuming, that in and of itself is toxic. I know you're listening to this podcast, but there are so many podcasts that are being published that promote the separation of the family, that promote the fracturing of Black men and Black women. And then we think, well, so what's going to happen with our children that are in the middle of this? So the media is toxic, whether it's what's on television, whether it's what's coming over the radio, what's on YouTube. So much of it is hedonistic. It's depicting violence. It's depicting hypersexualized mindsets. It's promoting drug abuse. And I know that's something I talked about recently. We really have to reconsider the content that we're consuming in our media. And it's interesting because those individuals who participate in the entertainment industry, whether they're actors, actresses, recording artists, how often do we see them talking to us about their mental health challenge and them working through recovery from addiction or going to a therapist to kind of unpack some of the trauma that they had as a child. But they produce content that promotes behavior that's problematic. They produce content that promotes thinking and a mindset that's problematic. And so that could be quite hypocritical. And we really should be holding our those artists that come before us. We should be holding the whole business more accountable, in my opinion. So our media is toxic. Our family and the most basic foundational unit is family in a society, in a culture, in a community, in a nation. The basic unit is family, and our families are fractured. Our families are fractured, and we don't promote. I was interviewed recently on a WVON, a radio station based out of Chicago, and the host, Mandine T. Muhammad, who's been a previous guest on the podcast, he brought up family. And I said, one of the things that we don't do in our community, to the extent that I think that we should, one, we don't promote family marriage. We don't promote marriage as much as we should, but we also don't promote longevity. We don't promote having longevity in a marriage. The moment we run up into some uncomfortable circumstance, some difficulty, we check out. We throw in the towel. Now, I'm not saying that, someone should stay in an environment or in a household or in a relationship that impacts one's health or safety in a negative way. I am not promoting that. However, there are some circumstances that happen in marriage, and those people who have been married for any amount of time, you know what I'm talking about. You get tired of this person that you're looking at day after day. You don't agree on everything. And sometimes you say, I want a break. I want away from this person, right? But that's not marriage. That's not marriage. Marriage is enduring challenges, enduring difficulties, and then modeling that for our children, right? So if our foundational unit is fractured in our society, what do we think that is doing to the mental and emotional health of an entire community? And then something else that is contributing to the degradation of our mental health is some of the legislation that's being passed. I mean, they are stealing the autonomy and authority of parents with their children and promoting concepts and ideas through education, through legislation. And the parents are saying, wait, where's my control? What can I do? That's something I'm going to talk about in another episode of the podcast, and it's going to be it's going to be coming up pretty soon, just talking about the challenges that we find in parenting. So I'm not going to get too much into that, but there's a good deal of things that's coming from the desk of some legislators that I find problematic, and I'll talk about that in a follow-up episode. So weapons and gun violence that we see, that is impeding and degrading and impacting the mental health of our people. We want our people to be well. We want our people to have positive mindsets. And I know that, there are some things that happen in a person's body physiologically that can contribute to mental diseases. And there's personality disorders. And I understand that we have a whole field of psychiatry, psychology that addresses it. However, if our people are living in war zones, and I know when I say things like this, many of our minds may think about what's happening in our urban environments in the cities. I'm not just talking about the violence that's happening in urban cities. Now, certainly we can think about Chicago and Philadelphia and some other major cities where there's violence, right? But some of our children are attending schools in the suburbs, right? We move out of the hood because we want a place that's safe. So we move to the suburbs, and people are running up in our schools and shooting our children. And our children are doing active shooter drills in school where they should be safe, where it should be purely a learning environment, and they're preparing for war in the schools, and not from war from the Russians or from the Chinese, but from the neighbors. And so this is problematic, and it contributes to the degradation of the mental health in our community. So it's important that we're talking about mental health. It's a great conversation that we have promoting mental health, mental healing, and we have to also include those things that are degrading and impacting our mental health in a negative way, so that we can try to prevent some of the things that we suffer from, because we don't have to suffer. And sometimes we create the environment, and maybe because of the choices that we're making, perhaps because we're not informed, mental health impacts don't just come out of thin air. It's coming from something. And I'm sure if we begin really looking around and observing our environment, we'll be able to identify some of the culprits that's impacting us right here around us. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. I encourage this audience who listens, who wants to be informed, to also be proactive and to think and be ahead of some of these things. And as you continue listening to the podcast, I pray that you find and you hear something that you can share with someone else that's of value. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property, and to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, noramahammed.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@noraspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.